as someone who grew up here in Connecticut and now spends all of my time while I'm here driving on the roads, riding on the rails, I know just from a psychological perspective how damaging congestion and traffic is. And as we try to figure out how to make this case in Washington and in Hartford as to why we can't accept the status quo, part of my thought was that we've got to move beyond just the data and the numbers. We've got to talk about what it really means to people's lives. And so we went out and said, listen, tell us your stories. Tell us what it means to you to sit on 95 for an extra hour and a half every single day. Tell us what it means to you to not have the certainty on Metro North that other commuters may have. And I will tell you, we have been absolutely overwhelmed by the number of stories and the real passion of those stories. People who regularly miss sports games with their kids, have no ability to help with homework because they routinely get to home after their child has gone to bed. Barbers who have to close down their shop early because there's only one train out of Bridgeport back to where they live in Waterbury in the afternoon, so they lose thousands of dollars in income. People who just feel more stressed out than they were before they had to make that extra half an hour commute to the new job that they got in New York City instead of the one that they used to have in Stamford. And so we've passed along these stories to my colleagues. We've sent them to the Department of Transportation, Anthony Fox, and we wanted today to really connect together all of this anecdotal evidence that we've gotten with some of the potential policy prescriptions. I first just sort of want to walk you through sort of a snapshot of where we are today. This is just 3 or 4 slides that just give you a sense. So this is Google Maps on an average morning. This is taken a screenshot taken at 8:10 a.m. in Norwalk. It looks totally familiar to anybody that knows Norwalk. You are absolutely at a dead stop at the intersection of 95 and Route 7. And as many people who know, when you come down 95, even during non-rush hour times, the most likely place that you are to stop is at the intersection of Route 7. I put this up there as just a preview of something that I'm going to be doing and rolling out over the course of the rest of the year. My office is going to put together a town-by-town survey of traffic patterns. And it's really amazing because with all of this information from sites like Google Maps, from applications like Waze, you can get a pretty good real-time estimate every morning of how long it takes to get from every town in Connecticut to all of the major commuting destinations, whether they be New Haven or Stamford or New York. And so we're going to come and we're going to survey all of this data that comes in through these websites and release some reports so that you can sort of see what kind of traffic means all along this corridor. And you're going to regularly see these kind of this bright red up and down the spine of Fairfield County. And I'm not going to tell you why it matters because you wouldn't be here if you didn't know, but our economic livelihood as a state is tied up in our ability to move people and goods back and forth to New York and Boston. That is one of the reasons people come to this state. Let's admit it. They don't come here because we're the cheapest place to locate a business. They don't come to Connecticut because we're the cheapest place to live. They come here because of the quality of life and because of the proximity to these major economic hubs. And so every day that at 8 o'clock in the morning, Norwalk and Stamford and New Haven all look like that is a day that we're losing money. Here's just the raw numbers. This is actually sort of cut off, but this is annual trips from the Newark area, so sort of New Jersey, south of New York, and New York to Boston and Providence. This is not counting the commuters that we're talking about here. So in addition to the tens of thousands of Connecticut commuters who are moving back and forth to New York, to New Haven every day, you have 9.6 million people coming from the Newark area and 10.2 million people coming from New York. And here's what's even more astonishing. For these inner city commuters, they are almost all on the road From Newark, 97% of that 9.6 million every year is car traffic. From New York City, because you can get to a train station, it's a little bit better, but it's still about 70% car traffic. From people in New York City who are going to Boston and Providence, they're getting on 95. And so you compound all of our local traffic with this intercity traffic, and you can see why today 95 has about double the amount of cars on it than it was initially designed for, which is why many of us are supportive of efforts to modernize 95, as much as we are also supportive of efforts to invest in major rail infrastructure. The Northeast Corridor, which is Boston to Washington, D.C., needs about $50 billion over the next 15 years just to maintain a state of good repair. So Bob just told you that of this $100 billion, 2/3 of it is in the state of Connecticut just for the state of good repair. Well, think of that number. $50 billion is needed along the Northeast Corridor rail line just to keep it up to the state of good repair. Never mind, the straightening projects that we want to do in order to speed up time. It just shows you how enormous it is, and you can see why it's $50 billion. Because just in Fairfield County, we have 4 bridge projects that together are going to be about $3 to $4 billion, and that's just bridges alone. So we have an enormous amount of money to spend just to keep the existing system, never mind making those improvements, which would, as many of us want to do, cut down the time it takes to get from Norwalk to New York City by the order of 20 minutes. This is one of our biggest problems along this line, is that to make those infrastructure investments, it's not just like the federal government can come in and fix it. All of these different states run the rail line, and they all have autonomy over many of the projects that are done. And so you not only have to come up with the money, but then you also have to overcome the fact that administration of the rail line is divvied up. And then just to give you a sense of our challenge here in Connecticut, just when you look at bridges alone, we have 357 bridges in Connecticut on our roads that are structurally deficient, and 37% of the bridges here in Norwalk are structurally deficient. Now, structurally deficient doesn't mean they're going to fall down, so don't worry about it. 1/3 of bridges in Norwalk aren't going to fall down. It just means that that they need work, and that they're going to become dangerous at some point if you don't do work now. So that just sort of gives you a very quick sort of sense of where we are, and there's not an enormous amount of good news. And so I want to walk you through a little bit of what the federal government is doing, but you're going to see that it's not enough. And the decision we have to make is whether we are so fed up with the status quo that we are willing to embrace controversial solutions, right? Politically difficult solutions that often involve tax increases, changes in the way that we commute, that are necessary to get us the resources we need to fix this problem. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. But that's where we've been on transportation. We have all of these enormous needs, all of this lingering traffic, and yet we essentially do the same thing year after year. We spend a little bit more and a little bit more every year, and we get nothing different out of it. So the good news is that Congress just passed a 5-year transportation bill. The bad news is that the average annual increase over those 5 years is about 2.9%. 2.9% increases does not cut it when you have $50 billion of backlog work on the Northeast Rail Corridor, and when you have billions and billions of dollars to unclog the highway arteries in Connecticut and Massachusetts and throughout the Northeast. The good news is Connecticut gets more than its fair share. So Connecticut will get more than 2.9% increase. Connecticut will get about $300 million more over the next 5 years than it would have under the old bill. So Connecticut, we have been able as a delegation to secure more funding for Connecticut than just our population might merit. The formula favors us, so that's good news for the state. But it's still not nearly enough. When you talk about a $100 billion plan that the governor has rolled out, $300 million in additional money from the federal government certainly is not revolutionary. And there's some small good news in rail funding in the bill as well. Amtrak gets more money than ever before. My priority as I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee and the committee there that oversees transportation funding, the Transportation Subcommittee. So my priority there was to get a fund in the federal government specifically for the Northeast Rail Corridor. We've never had that. Amtrak just gets all the money and then they can spend it wherever they want. For the first time, the federal budget this year has a fund for the Northeast Rail Corridor. It's got a tiny amount of money in it. So the money is sort of, in the grand scheme of things, meaningless. The principle is what's important. We finally have an account in the federal government that's set up to fund projects here. Another big win is that traditionally the Acela line is the only piece of rail in the country that makes money. The Acela line actually is profitable. The Northeast Corridor is profitable because of the Acela. In fact, it's so profitable that it makes about $300 million in profit every year. But guess what Amtrak historically does with that money? Amtrak takes that money and uses it to subsidize all of the money-losing operations in other parts. Part of this year's federal budget commands Amtrak to keep that $300 million in the Northeast Corridor. So they have to take that profit and spend it here. They can't use it in other places. But again, just look at the big picture. $50 billion in need, $300 million, helpful. It's just simply not going to get you to where you need to get to. Now the governor has recognized this, and I'll sort of let in the question and answer period Bob, handle questions about the state portion of this. But the governor certainly gets this, which is why he has proposed this breakthrough plan, $100 billion plan over the course of 10 years. Now, currently, there's only about 65 to 70% of the funding that you need to get there. So you've got to come up with another essentially $28 billion or so to get to that final number, which is where the difficult conversation is going to come. How do you come up with that money? Is it increases in the sales tax or the gas tax? Is it congestion pricing? Is it cuts to other services? That's a difficult question. But he's recognized that if you don't make that commitment to dramatically increase funding, then you're not going to solve these problems. Similarly, at the federal government, we have to have that reckoning as well. We have to acknowledge that having not raised the gas tax since 1993, we are perpetually in a state of just doing as much as we did last year. We'll never give more than 3% a year, which doesn't do anything new, right? It just effectively reflects the inflationary increase in the cost of construction projects, unless we accept that you can't run a 2016 highway system on $1993. Remember, the gas tax is not a percentage, so the amount of money we're collecting in the gas tax is the exact same amount of money and declining from what it was in 1993. Why? Because cars are more fuel efficient, people are traveling less miles on a per capita basis, there's more electric cars out there, people are moving to other forms of transportation. So we simply have an old way of financing, but nobody in Washington wants to talk about raising the gas tax because we can't raise taxes, even if it's to invest in major economic development like we're talking about here today. So I say that as a means to just prompt everyone here to understand that none of this is easy. But I've just encountered thousands of people who've been willing to share with me their stories of how fed up they are with the state of transportation, that I'm convinced that here in this state we can get the consensus to do some politically difficult things in order to fix it. And if we do, we'll be investing in the great strength of this state. If we do, our transportation system will become a selling point rather than a liability for Connecticut when we are trying to attract businesses here. And I'm hopefully young enough and new enough to this job that I'll be around to be able to say that we learned our lesson, that we were fed up, and then we went and did something about it. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much in terms of a slide presentation or statistics to get the conversation started, but we've made progress at the federal level, not enough. The state has made progress at the state level, not enough. And it has to be, in particular Fairfield County, in particular places like Norwalk, that rise up and command both Hartford and Washington to break out of this sort of political cowardice when it comes to funding transportation and do something bigger and better and smarter. And let's talk about how to do it smarter as well. I'm giving you a lot of statistics and a lot of data, but I want to ground this in a conversation about how we feel about our lives. Because really the whole reason that we're involved in government is to make people feel better about their lives, right? Everything that we're doing, whether it's trying to improve our schools, whether it's trying to get people access to better employment, is to try to improve the quality of life, to try to improve the psychological well-being. That's like the actual end result of all of our work, is that people just feel better about their lives. It's not actually, in the end, measured in data. Your sense of whether you've lived a life well lived is not about how much money you made, not about the time of your commute. It's just about how healthy you feel and how good you feel. And so I wanted to sort of bring psychology into this conversation a little bit, because I think in the end that may be what pushes us across the finish line. So this is a big scope, and I get that. We're talking about the psychological impact of traffic. We're talking about specific projects that we have to undertake at the state level or the federal level. We're talking about how you pay for it, where the money comes from. So there's a lot here to unpack, but at this point we really wanted to turn it over to all of you to take your questions for any of us or all of us, to take your comments on sort of what you've seen or other things that you've read or seen, and try to use the remaining 40 minutes or so for a discussion here. So I'm just going to recognize, we're going to do no cards, but I think that's probably too formal for this crowd, so I'm just going to recognize people that want to pitch in with a question or a thought, and then we'll respond to it. So go ahead, sir, you can start in the back, and just stand up so we can hear you a little bit better.
David Lott. I am from Fairfield, and I was talking with my wife on the way over. The fact I commuted to New York every day, and with the new train cars, that has been a huge, for me, that has been a huge, it's a pleasant ride in the city.
Yeah.
Having said that, the cost of, paying for, my train ticket now I think is $400 a month. So I pay that $400 so that I can have that time, to get into the city. And I just wonder what on either Metro North, North End, or the government, can do to lower that cost, to provide more incentive for more people to take the train, because as everyone who works and lives in New York knows, the MTA is constantly saying, oh, we're out of money, where subway fees are going up, train prices are going up. I just wonder what is being done to reduce that cost.
I appreciate it. I'll stay here, and then you guys can answer questions from there. So I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to respond. A couple things, or one thing in particular. Those fares go up, not because they aren't subsidized, they all continue to be subsidized, but because without the major investment that we're talking about in upkeep of the rail, it's the MTA that bears that responsibility. And so the MTA and Metro North and Amtrak on the Connecticut corridor sort of share the responsibility of keeping that rail line in a state of good repair, because they don't get sufficient resources from the federal and the state government to do it themselves. So, you could just provide a bigger direct subsidy, or as a community, we could make the decision to support more of the infrastructure, which would take the pressure off of commuters to do it themselves. So, I mean, just to tell you how backwards our federal funding is when it comes to rail in particular, we've got a lot of road needs. I'm not saying we're spending enough on our highways, but on an annual basis, the federal government is spending about $50 billion, give or take, on highways. Amtrak's annual budget from the federal government is about $1.2 billion. So we are spending 50 times as much money at the federal level on the roads as we are on the rail. So that is in part why the cost of the ticket is what it is, because we don't have the infrastructure subsidy, and so a lot of those operations have to cover it themselves. And so, hopefully the byproduct of, a successful investment strategy at the state level and the federal level, is shorter commute times, is more M8s, the new cars, but is also the ability to control the price of those fares. And listen, as you know, you'd have a lot more people off the roads onto the rail lines if it was, if it was more affordable.
My name is David Emberling. I'm from Weston. You alluded to this earlier, but I want to know what your position is on restoring the level of gasoline taxes back to where they were in, let's say, 1993 in inflation-adjusted dollars, so that the actual spending, we would be spending the same spendable amount of money, or have that available as we did 20 or 30 years ago.
So my position is pretty simple on this. I not only support it, but I'm the author of the only bipartisan proposal to do it in Congress. Last year, I got together with Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, who's a pretty conservative Republican, and he and I put together the only bipartisan proposal to permanently fix the transportation formula by indexing the gas tax to inflation. Our proposal isn't simple, but it essentially catches the gas tax up to where it would have been if in 1993 it moved up by whatever the inflationary increase was, and then pegs it to some version of the CPI moving forward. Now, in order to make it a bipartisan proposal and try to recruit support from both sides of the aisle, we attached to it a bunch of extensions of tax cuts for businesses and families, so that in the end the proposal was actually revenue neutral. It was raising as much money in gasoline taxes as it was cutting in business and individual taxes, and that was very important to be able to draw support from both sides of the aisle. Some transportation advocates didn't like that because they didn't like mixing tax reform in other areas in order to win support for an increase in the gas tax, but in reality that's what you have to do. It has, I can't tell you that there have been members of both sides of the aisle flocking to support our proposal. It takes, it's certainly a leap of faith to go out there and argue for higher taxes, but in Connecticut, it's a no-brainer. Why? Because since 1950, Connecticut has gotten back 1.6 cents in transportation funds for every cent it sends to the federal government in gas taxes. So again, I sort of said this at the outset, the formula is set up in a way that Connecticut is a consistent net winner on transportation, taxes, and revenue. Now, as you know, we are a consistent net loser, right, in many other areas of federal taxation. So if you want to categorize whether we're getting back as much as we give in income tax or in corporate tax, no, we're not. We are a net donor state when it comes to overall federal tax obligations. But on the gas tax, we get back a lot more. So if somebody said, if you give $1 and you're guaranteed to get $1.60 back, you take it, and we should. Because at the federal level, they have this debate at the state level as to whether they're going to have a lockbox, because at the state level, historically, the money that has come in through gas taxes has been used for other purposes. Not at the federal level. At the federal level, there's no history of gas tax is being stolen to pay for anything else. So if you do raise the federal gas tax or just index it for inflation, you're guaranteed essentially to get all of that money back for transportation. So we've supported this. We've certainly gotten more support since we announced it. So I'm not saying there hasn't been any additional support, but it is telling that this 5-year transportation bill did not raise the gas tax. It did raise taxes, but it sort of cobbled together some tax increases from a bunch of different programs here and there because people were afraid of the toxicity of the gas tax. And I just think ultimately that's disingenuous, and it's something we need to tackle.
I'm Colin Costello from Norwalk. With the ridership on Metro North increasing over the past several years, and we do have the new cars, but I've heard we need a lot more cars. Because there's a standing time only, especially during commuting hours to and from the city. But we also need more garage space so that people can take the trains. I know in Stamford, they want to tear down the garage and build office buildings. Right? Where are the commuters going to park? Yeah. Other than some privately owned parking lot?
Sure. Thank you for your question. And yeah, that's if you look at the statistics over the last few years, Metro North has had increases 2-3% a year, which has been healthy for Metro North. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that the new rail cars are in and people are having a much better commute. And we're not, I remember, many years ago, I think it was when Governor Rowland was there, we had on Valentine's Day, as a matter of fact, a bunch of legislators from both sides of the aisle came in, and we heard because the rail cars were freezing up, the old, was it the M2s, M6, whatever they were so old, they were older than I were, and I was, and they long should have been put out to pasture. I think in the Let's Go CT initiative, there are obviously purchasing more cars. The interesting thing is that there's more riders from New York City to Connecticut than from Connecticut to New York City in the morning, in the commute, and also intrastate, there are lots of commuters as well. So we have to keep our eye on that and work in that direction so that we understand, and there's as the gentleman said before, a $400 a month ticket, and you don't have a seat. That doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's not a good value for what we're trying to do. So in the Let's Go CT initiative, there is a plan to purchase more cars. And I believe also with part of what we're trying to do on a statewide perspective with transit-oriented development, at least I know, I'll give an example, like down in the Merritt 7 area in Norwalk, there's a plan to do, there's already a plan in place to have a better platform there, a longer platform so that trains can come in. More often have trains to have potentially have a parking garage there as well. One of the biggest sticking points we have parking probably in Norwalk is in East Norwalk because the land around that is private, though there's some houses that have been purchased by the state. That'll be about 40 spots, I believe, on East Avenue and 4 Point Street. So it's one of those things that we're aware of, and in this plan, it addresses some of those things. It just can't happen fast enough, and that's what we're trying to do, is help try to move this thing along the best that we can. And TOD is very important to that, to make sure that there's parking available for folks.
I'll just make one additional comment, which is I put up that slide about trying to build a modern Northeast corridor when you have to rely on 8 or so different states along that corridor. Well, Connecticut has the same problem too, in that we're trying to build a modern rail system while still allowing local town autonomy over the land use decisions surrounding those stations. I know that there is no thornier issue in the state of Connecticut, right, than giving up local autonomy and local rule and home control. But let's be honest about what that means for this issue of parking, right? So if you're a city or a town in Connecticut, you don't have the same set of incentives to build parking as the region has writ large, because a lot of the people coming in and using that garage are probably not your residents. Probably a lot of your high-profile residents have those parking passes, right, that they've waited for a long time for. So by building that capacity, you're satisfying demand, but it might not be your town's demand. Alternatively, a parking garage probably isn't going to make as much money for your grand list as something else might. It's not going to add, it might not add economic development in the way that this TOD would, as a way as housing would, as in the same way that that retail or commercial would. And so it's another reason why you've got to have some ability to regionally plan here, so that you can say, hey, listen, along the line, here's the number of parking spots we need, and we're going to find a way to put those in. And here's where TOD makes sense, here's where it may not make sense. But when every town is trying to, just pursue their own priorities, sometimes parking is one of the things that gets left out. So, yeah.
On parking, the thing is that yes, we were waiting for TOD and all that, everything, but until that happens, we have no place to park. So Mayor Reiling, I'm asking you, because we lost all of that parking behind St. Thomas Church that is not being replaced. And if we are now going to lose more spaces, which I don't know where those would, if you said we were going to lose more in Fort Point, but
No, gaining space.
Oh, so where can we gather and get more spaces? We lost a lot to the Moda Media building years ago. We've never gotten them back. And I am hearing from commuters constantly about why they can't get parking back there and when are we going to get more parking. Because no matter what, you can't get more commuters unless you have more parking. And we are not seeing an effort by the city of Norwalk to help the East Norwalk commuters. We have plenty of parking lots in South Norwalk. We have a lot of ways to get to it, but South Norwalk doesn't help a lot of people because it's a much longer commute. It's much harder to get to the train station from some of those lots, and it's not necessarily feasible. So we want to know what we can do for East Norwalk.
Yeah, we tried very hard to work with the church to try to work out something where we wouldn't lose those spots, but they had other things on their agenda where they're looking to increase their programs during the day, and they just couldn't afford to give us those parking spaces. But we did try to negotiate some agreements. You're right. I get, and the South Norwalk train station, I get, and I don't know if this gentleman here is the one that sends me the emails, but every now and then I get an email, well, I have a permit and I couldn't find a parking place in the South Norwalk garage. I have that before the Parking Authority, before the Department of Public Works. We're trying to find ways that we can increase parking, but as the Senator said, the key is to increase the transit-oriented development where you have people living, they don't need to drive to the parking lots, and then get people living in your urban core so they can find other ways to get to the train station other than driving. It's not an easy fix because, as the Senator also said, it's very, very challenging to build parking garages and parking spaces where perhaps the grand list would grow with something else there. So it is challenging. It has to be done regionally. It has to be a broad analysis of the parking needs coupled with other needs of the community as well. I wish it was an easy fix. It's definitely not, but we are trying.
Terry, can I just jump in as well? Just to let you know that we collectively reached out to Moda Media and the owners of that building and said, temporarily,
Right.
permanently, some, many, all, can you give us something, some parking spots? And the answer was flatly no.
Do you know they have a lot right next door that's
Yeah.
empty? It's like
Yeah.
30 spots. It's been empty for years.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I'm glad the
And
Senator
I
brought that
would
up.
really love for us to be able to use those because I don't see anybody, even them, parking there even as an item.
The answer I got back was the building is 100% occupied, or they just signed a lease, and they're going to need every single spot that's there. So that's what we heard. The other part, I talked about 4 Point and East Avenue, and some of this gets tied up in the whole Walk Bridge project.
Right.
But I had reached out to the DOT a while ago to begin knocking the houses down and in the building, the bakery, which, because I think everybody's pretty much out at this point.
Yes,
or
they
it's
are.
going to be. But to start that parking lot there helps on a number of levels. And 1 week they're going to do it, another week they're not going to do it. It depends on where they are in the design of the walk bridge and what's happening from that perspective. But the mayor and I are working on that very hard to try and get that as part of whatever's happening with the walk bridge so that we can give commuters some relief sooner rather than later. Because I think last year that parking lot was not going to happen for another few years. We're trying to get it so that it happens sooner rather than later because, especially in light of and especially because of what happened at St. Thomas.
Right,
Church.
and that was an unexpected thing that happened, I
Yeah.
think. At least from what I understand.
so we're working on it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and we tried, as I said, we tried to perhaps agree to pave the lot for them because that was one of the issues. It was very dangerous and needed a lot of paving. We wanted to pave it for them and with some of the, and increase the parking down there and let them pay us back at some point because we were paying them to use the lot. So, like I said, it just didn't happen. We spent many hours trying to work through that.
And the bottom line is that TOD and parking cannot nor should be mutually exclusive.
Right.
And sometimes that's how it's set up, is that, oh, well, we can't put parking there because then that wouldn't incentivize people to live, downtown. That's not, what you're hearing from these guys is that's not how Norwalk views it. But sometimes that's how it gets set up, and we've got to be able to do both. But I'll tell you, the only way you're going to be able to do more parking is to have more of a heavy foot from the federal government or the state. In Fairfield, for instance, they got a lot more parking when they built a new train station. So when they built a new train station, part of the deal was, we'll build you a new train station as long as you build new parking. But in that case, it was some major state money that allowed that to happen. So it's got to be both.
Oh, thank you. Doug House, in the City of New Haven. I run both the Parking Authority and the Traffic and Transportation and Parking Divisions for the City of New Haven. And we're having a big conversation with our top 10 employers in the downtown about transportation demand management. And everything about what we're talking about comes down to who offers free parking for their employee. So my garages cost $55,000 a space to build. Our surface lots cost $9,000 a space to build. How do we decouple a job, a train customer, and parking? And how do we decouple free parking from municipal, state, federal employees as a way to share and lead the way on values? Thank you.
I don't know, Doug, you should answer that question yourself. So, I thought like that was going to be like a question that you were then going to answer. So, no, I mean, listen, you guys are incredibly progressive in this. You're thinking through this. I mean, seriously, answer that question yourself. Tell us sort of what you think is the best way to do that, because you're exactly right? That's the way to get people downtown is a way to, part and parcel of that is answering their questions about parking. So what's the answer from your perspective?
Well, the City of New Haven charges its employees to park, and that's part of the answer, is making sure that people understand what the costs of these things go for. I know our state government does not charge employees to park. Our federal government does not charge employees to park. And I think the Attorney General is paying out $115 a month for my garages, thank you, to pay for. So that's a large expense that all of our taxpayers are paying for. How do we then encourage and incentivize people to think outside the car and stop thinking of the job as a car, as a parking space?
Well, I think some of that, you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, no,
comes
of course.
down to how do you rebuilding the urban core? I mean, because you think the psychology of, say, Connecticut Avenue and any other urban sprawl area where you have a lot of big box stores is to always put the big parking lot in the front, because psychologically that means if you see spots open, you have more parking than you need. You see spots open, you think, oh, I can go there to shop, it's not too busy. And then we have this kind of overdevelopment and sprawl that we, anybody ever read, I read it in college, Edge City is a really good book about urban sprawl. So I think if we're going to invest back into the urban core, and we're seeing millennials who aren't getting their driver's licenses, and we see people now who want to live in their apartments, and we're confident and hit the button, come down, and walk right out like what's going to happen hopefully on Glover Avenue, what's happening on West Avenue, and down in South Norwalk. That is a bit of a change of kind of psychology in mind of what, how do we perceive this to go? What do we value? Do we value, living here, working here, and then, having a free garage, or do we want to be a little how it was back, maybe decades ago when people lived in their cities and worked in their cities? So I think it's a bit of a mind shift, and as long as the urban cores remain safe, and people will feel like they want to live there and can live there, and there's a diversity of housing, there's restaurants, and there's shops and everything else, I think then that will bring people into the communities. So that's my answer anyway.
could we do a report on how much it's costing for us to pay for our federal, state, and municipal employees at your levels as part of our FedUp CT analysis?
How much it costs
Just fact finding.
taxpayers essentially for free parking for all those folks, yeah. No,
To Doug's point, if all of that funding could be somehow pooled into a district, like at the local level, then that funding stream from the additional $5 per square foot everyone's paying for free parking could be put into other improvements that would make it easier for everyone to get to work. And I think we're at the point with TOD where it's actually cheaper to give someone a taxi fare to and from the train station than to provide that parking space, additional parking space, given the opportunity cost of developing that land as other mixed income uses and getting millions of dollars in tax revenue for the local and state government. So
it's a fascinating. I'll just say this. It's a fascinating question because you're getting to sort of the root of what we socialize as costs and what we ask people to pay for themselves. And we have traditionally sort of accepted that it's a right to drive, it's a right to have a car, right? And so we are going to socialize lots of costs associated with that, to the point now where the gas tax, which used to kind of be the way that you paid for the roads, now only pays for about half of the federal expenses of driving on the roads. And so, whereas on the train, we don't really look at it that way. We still socialize part of the expenditure, but we basically expect you to pick up a big part of the share of riding on the train, but we expect us all to pick up the cost of driving a car, driving on the roads, paying for the parking spaces. And so, we can get into this question of congestion pricing as well, which is another piece of this conversation about sort of returning the cost of driving back to people who drive as a means to try to change behavior. John?
Thanks, Chris. I'm John Hartwell from Westport, and like Terry, I'm on the Commuter Rail Council. I have been on for 6 years. To your question about the cost of the commute, the subsidizing from the state of Connecticut is amongst the lowest in the country for any commuter. So I think it's about 30% provided by the state, 70% by the commuter. If you ride Long Island Railroad, it's a 50-50 split. But I think as Senator Duff or Representative LaVielle or Representative Steinberg will tell you, it's going to be a very difficult lift to get more money out of the state, especially with the way that the economy and the budget of the state is going right now. That's one thing. Secondly, unlike most everywhere else that Chris was talking about in terms of rail traffic, we own the right-of-way from Greenwich to New Haven. So we own the tracks, we own the overhead catenary, we own the cars, we own the stations, we own the parking lots. It's all on us. So when we come to a project like the Walk Bridge, we have to go to the federal government, ask them for money. The governor did that 2 years ago, came up with a plan to fund the $465 million at the time. Unfortunately, we had a presentation from the Department of Transportation just 2 weeks ago that the project cost just for the Walk Bridge is now somewhere between $700 and $900 million. Because there are additional things that they have to do. It's not just all on the bridge, but that's what they're projecting. And they're also projecting it's going to take a long time to get it done, and there's going to be a significant amount of disruption. So these are problems that are not going to be solved easily and not going to go away. To your question about Stanford Garage, yes, they do want to tear down the old piece of the garage there. It's about 700 spaces. The plan, however, is that as they do that, they're going to increase parking in 2 other garages right there at the site. So the place where they want to...
BLT's garage.
Sorry?
BLT's garage.
I don't know. It's actually not BLT's garage. But the point here is that they do have a plan that if they are able to put it into place, will increase the amount of parking at Stanford, not decrease it. And they have promised that they won't tear down the old garage until they have a new place built, which is going to have 1,000 spaces instead of the 700. So these things are really, really difficult, and at the heart of it is money. And we all know what's happening with the budget in Stanford and Hartford right now. So this is a difficult time.
Can I ask you a quick question? They just put $1.5 million into repairing that garage that's falling down.
I had a very long conversation with the commissioner just about that question. Why are they putting more money into the garage that they're going to tear down? And when he looked at the economics of it, it actually made sense. And I was very skeptical about that, and I had a long conversation with him a couple of months ago. I said, why are you doing this? Why are you putting money into a garage that you're going to tear down? And he said, look, here's how much it's going to cost us, here's how long we're going to be able to use it, here's what income we get from it right now. Right now, we're losing money because we don't have those spaces open. We need to reopen the garage, get it going, get the money coming back in while we build something somewhere else. So, they're not dumb, right? A lot of times it looks like the decisions that are made don't make a lot of sense, but these are really very complex, difficult questions, and so it's going to take us a long time. We all have to pull together on it.
Listen, regarding the walk bridge, the major cost I understand about the walk bridge is it opens and closes, correct? Is that correct?
It's a maritime bridge.
So how many companies need that bridge to open?
Exactly.
Leave it closed and buy out the companies and get rid of them. We probably saved $1 billion.
Yeah, really says we need an active Congress to close a navigable waterway, which is I mean the difficulty. It's true, right? That is the lion's share of that cost is that it allows you to navigate that river. If you can't navigate that river because that bridge is closed, you'll never be able to navigate that river. And I'm not close enough to that broader discussion to know the answer. Probably worth thinking about, at least. So go ahead and back.
Yes, good morning. My name is Vincent Penna. I own property that's adjacent to the drawbridge that the state is taking through intimate domain. I agree with that gentleman who just spoke. I'm 68 years old. I've been in this town all my life. That bridge had problems 50 years ago. Up and down, up and down. It works. The structure of it is perfectly sound. Welded shut. You can get an act of Congress. You can buy out the vines and the people, the ONGs upstreams that are big, powerful people. You're taking my property, my business. I'm a construction company that employs 50 people. I don't have a place to go. I've looked at a piece of property that's so contaminated, I can't afford it. I have to dissolve my business. It's a third-generation company. I have no place to go. State of Connecticut is putting me out of business. So I don't know what to do. The bridge does not need to be open and closed. In my opinion, I'm not an engineer, but I've talked to many. And I feel that what they're doing is unfair to me and other people that they're taking our property, which I built a company and I employ 40 to 50 people. I'm an emergency contractor for the state of Connecticut, Aquarian Water, and Eversource. This is my livelihood. My family has been in town all our lives, and I feel it's a shame we're spending this kind of money on this bridge that doesn't need to be done at this time. I have 30 days to get out of my property. I have nowhere to go. If anybody can help me, please come forward.
I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one about your particular situation. I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Chris, my name is Robert Hart. First, I want to thank you for being so visible before our last municipal election. Didn't work for me, worked for the other Dems. Your words were inspirational, and you helped us raise money, and it was really great. Now, apropos the walk bridge, I was wondering if any thought had been given to using prefabrication techniques. The reason I bring it up is that there was a bridge down in Virginia called the Coleman Bridge, which was rebuilt in 1995. The Coleman Bridge is the largest double swing bridge in the United States. It's the second largest in the world. To give you some perspective, the spans that move are longer than the Brooklyn Bridge. In 1995, it goes over the York River in Virginia. In 1995, that was rebuilt using modularized prefabrication techniques where they barge it in, crane it in place. It cost $75 million and took 9 days. I've got some paperwork.
Thanks, sir. Well prepared. Well prepared.
We like people who bring solutions.
I know.
We like solutions.
Yeah, I will not claim to know the engineering of the walk bridge, but I will absolutely take a look at this. Listen, we are relearning how to replace a lot of our bridges. What's happening now with the replacement of a major bridge overpass in Stamford and some of our others are going to be light years shorter in time than we used to, in part because I think of some of this technology. Obviously, the Walk Bridge, for the reasons we've talked about, is a much trickier bridge to rebuild. So some of these technologies may not be available, but I don't know the engineering on the Walk Bridge, so I'll plead ignorance.
We meet on a regular basis, very, very frequently with ConnDOT, the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Right now, they were supposed to be at, I believe, the 60% design stage. They're still at the 30. I think they've realized that they've taken on a very, very complex and difficult project, and nobody has ever done anything like this before, so they're struggling. And we meet on a, like I said, regular basis. We have briefings, and I have people at the table every substantive meeting that they have to talk about design. I have people at the table making sure they bring back the information to us.
Regarding your point, my name is Jennifer Barr Johnson. I'm a representative at the town meeting, representative in Westport, and a former transit director. But I actually, before I answer when you made your statement, I would, being that ConnDOT is only 30% ready to do that design, I think on behalf of everybody, I would appeal to have the senator help this gentleman keep his business that much longer. I mean, if we haven't figured a solution that they know that what they want to do, then let him keep his business. And if you can intercede on that part while that's being worked out, I think that would be a benefit to everybody. But that's not my question. My question has more to do with recognizing that we need to be spending smarter. That's going to be part of the solution. And right now, I am going to be using your statement of the definition of insanity is the repeating the same thing. What we're doing in Southwest Connecticut right now is insane as it relates to transit. In terms of buses, we have Connecticut Transit, we have Norwalk Transit, we have Bridgeport Transit, we have Westport Transit District. In addition, we have a whole bunch of new technology in the state investing in operational studies for our different transit districts, and I do commend Norwalk Transit District. They provide a good service in our community. But they're doing operational studies for Greater Bridgeport Transit, and then they operate the Coastal Link. But the Coastal Link has one automatic vehicle location system that doesn't communicate to another automatic vehicle location system. So this really goes to the need for a centralized planning and regional planning that makes sense for Southwest Connecticut. This is a political football that has been thrown around the state, and having a transportation boundary that currently for Southwest, for the 8 towns right now, goes north. And there are good people running that, but it really doesn't make sense if our transportation in Southwest Connecticut is being managed by an entity that's dealing with transportation going all the way up to Dutchess County, if our major issues are going east-west. So my question is what's happening now to create the transportation planning boundaries that we must have now to start making more sense around Southwest Connecticut?
And I'm sincere about working with you afterwards to see if there's anything we can do to help. Hallelujah. All I can say is, what's amazing to me is that we have lots of regionalism in this state, but you belong as a town, unbeknownst to most of the citizens, to probably 100+ different regional associations. They're all different regions, right? So like you said, some regions go north, some regions go east, some regions go south. So we have loads of regionalization. It's just a webby mass of contradictions geographically. I've always thought that our bus systems needed to be more regionalized, needed to be closer to something that was administered on a statewide or at least county basis. I don't know if that's a topic of discussion at the state level, but you really can't do effective intercity bus service if you have such balkanized administration from city to city, and there really is. There's pretty good bus service within all of these cities, and there's still a lot of gaps when it comes to intercity bus service, in part because no one is really properly aligned or incentivized to do that. I don't know, is that a discussion that's happening?
Think about some of the most successful bus lines around here. It's the Route 7 link, it's the Route 1 corridor that goes back and forth. I think I can just kind of go back to DOT land and think about, I'm sorry.
You know what, this mic that he was using actually is working.
Okay, if you go back to, sorry about that. If you go back to DOT land for a second, because I was saying before that the two most successful lines right now, at least in this area, are the Route 1 Coastal Link and the Route 7 link as well. They tend to have some of the highest ridership, which we're always fighting for the funding to continue that, which is kind of a shame. But with we had a number of years in the past, prior to this current administration, but where we had a number of different DOT commissioners, and they were we'd recycle them every year or two, and we'd have a new commissioner and a new commissioner and a new commissioner. And it's hard to get anything done when you don't have the continuity of leadership. Commissioner Redeker has been now at the DOT for a number of years. He's a transit guy. He just hired a new deputy as well as a transit person. Is that right, Karen? Am I correct? And so I think now that there is, with this Let's Go CT initiative, the idea is to do an integrated bus service, because you can't have integrated bus, train, road transportation system if you have a broken bus system in itself. So you've got to get all that working, and I think we now have the expertise to get some of that together and work together. How that all ends up at the end of the day, I'm not sure, but there's smart people who have experience in these areas and continuity of leadership that I feel confident that we can at least, we're going in that direction and going in the right place, because one is you can't afford all these different systems all over the place, and two, it's not working really well for the ridership and for the customers who need to get back and forth, as we saw on the maps with the data.
It's the third rail of Connecticut politics, and we need to find a way to get over it, because we are not going to advance if we don't have greater regional integration, greater regional standardization. The county of San Diego, which is how California administers a lot of its transportation assets, is bigger than the state of Connecticut. So there are counties that are bigger than our state. And there's a reason why we waste a lot of money here, why we have tremendous inefficiencies. And it is in part tied to our jealous guarding of home rule. And there's a lot of good reasons for home rule. I'm not saying blow it up, but we can do a lot better. Sir, go ahead in the back.
Senator, my name is Tony DeAndrea. I'm a neighbor of the Pennas. I'm also being taken for this project. My question is why should so few sacrifice so much for so many? I agree that we should have this transportation infrastructure repaired. The person who just sits next to the bridge and watches it opens and closes realizes that it needs to be repaired or replaced. That should be part of an environmental impact statement that should be prepared prior to the project going forward. Has anybody seen an environmental impact statement? FTA is part of this. Federal funding is part of this, is it not?
Federal funding is, yeah.
So wouldn't there be a NEPA document as well explaining, here's the 10 options that exist for this, including the realignment of the Federal Navigation Channel, which, while an act of Congress, has been done in Norwalk once before. Not insurmountable. Just we have to start. What was the quote that you just made? We have to start looking beyond the regionalism of it and take a holistic approach to what is best. Repairing that section from the South Norwalk to Norton's must be done, because there's stuff in there from the 1800s. But nobody's asked anybody about why should we be doing this, why should we be doing that. I'm under the same time clock that he's under. And I have no place to go. And I've been down there for 25 years with a very important business that I feel is very important. Hopefully Bob and Harry feel that way too. But we don't have an advocate. Many people are trying, many people are talking in different directions. It's been over a year since the last public information meeting on the Walk Bridge. It's now north of $1 billion. And we haven't been talking about it?
Yeah.
Just looking for help.
Okay, I'll be willing to help as well. Listen, as everybody knows here, eminent domain has been a long-time tool in the toolkit of American infrastructure. It's used today in a very limited fashion compared to how it was used when we built our modern rail and interstate system. but it is no less painful when it is used. It is something that, of course, has been a very controversial and difficult topic in this country for a very long time. So I'd be happy again, at the federal level, I'm not as involved in a lot of these local questions of construction of the walk bridge. We'd be happy to work with you as well. So.
Yes, Joe Cobana from Norwalk. Earlier this morning, you talked about non-traditional solutions. That same thing isn't working. I was just wondering if you could briefly mention some of these solutions in addition to the raising of the gas tax and more regionalization.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any way around the fact that we do have to spend more money. And, there's some places where you can gain efficiencies, but it'll never be enough. Connecticut, in the United States, just think about this for a second. China, as a percentage of their GDP, spends about 12% on transportation. Europe, even in the middle of a hemorrhaging recession, as a percentage of their GDP, spends about 4 to 6% on transportation. The United States right now is spending about 2% of our GDP on transportation. So there's no other country in the developed or developing world that spends less as a percentage of our economy on transportation. So we have to do better. Similarly, one of the most fascinating set of data that you ever look at is how household budgets have changed over the course of the last 60 years and what percentage is going to certain costs. The two explosions have been, for American families since 1950, have been transportation and healthcare. So two line items which back in 1950 would have only been, maybe about 5% collectively of your family budget, now, can be for many families upwards of 40%, 30%, 20% of their family budget. So federal government spending less, families are spending more, we've got to spend more. So inefficiency is only going to get you part of the way there. The gas tax is the most sensical way of paying for it because it essentially asks the people who use the asset to pay for the asset. Other ideas that have been floated, for instance, would be using the revenue from corporate tax reform to fund infrastructure investment, because that certainly helps those corporations that are paying in. There's a tax provision now that penalizes you if you're a company for bringing income back into the United States that was earned outside of the United States. There is a lot of talk about giving a window of time in which you could take that revenue earned overseas, bring it back to your domiciled tax entity in the United States, and do it at a discounted tax rate. And then use all of that money, all of the money that you will tax at that discounted rate that was never going to be brought in if not for this tax holiday, to be used for infrastructure. That would be in the multiple billions of dollars. That'd be a lot of money. So there's no shortage of other ways that you can fund transportation beyond a gas tax. None of them will bear the same connection to the asset that the gas tax will. The corporate tax reform is probably the most likely. Here's the other thing. You can also incentivize a lot more private investment. So a lot of people talk about infrastructure banks, whereby investors would put money side by side with the federal government. That's gained a lot of traction. I am generally supportive of it, but my only caution is that sometimes people make that sound as if that's free money. It isn't. Every investor that's going to want to put money into an infrastructure bank is going to expect, a fairly significant rate of return. And so they will want money back from the government with interest over time, or they will want a tolling system or a revenue system coming off of a rail line to return their investment. And so, purely from a perspective of protecting taxpayer dollars, you'd be better off to just spend it out of the Treasury rather than go out and raise the money privately and have to pay back the return. But admittedly, we probably don't have the appetite to get all of that money from the taxpayers, and so maybe you'd be smarter to ask the private sector to do part of it. So that's another way as well. Have the private sector do more, return to the 1700s, when we had private toll roads operating all over the country. Indiana has done that, for instance. They've sold their highways off to investors, and so investors run their highway system now, and they toll them, and they take the money, and they are putting some of the money back in, keeping some of it for themselves. And I don't know enough about it to know whether it's been successful, but there are a lot of Democrats and Republicans who like that idea. So we have time for a few more, but go ahead.
Senator, I think I have a solution for getting more money for the federal system. But the first thing is I agree with you that we need to change the paradigm from so much subsidy to the car and shift it to rail and cycling, walking, TOD. So the thing is, because of all of the backup of car traffic, there is a tremendous impact on health along the corridor, especially since I-95 goes through major urban areas, and a lot of folks, especially environmental justice and low-income folks, live along I-95. Has there been a health impact study, and why should there not be one? Because to do nothing to help our rail system and other modes of transportation is causing a lot of health issues. Asthma rates are shooting up. There needs to be a causation study to help us get more money for the Northeast Corridor. I think in Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, and beyond, New Haven as well, I think that could be a way to tie in additional federal monies.
Yeah, let me think about that. You know, and this is a chicken and the egg problem. You know, the highways go where the people are, and the people go where the highways are, and so you're always going to have a lot of people living around, you know, transportation assets. But that's frankly another reason to put people on rails instead of on roads. You have a lot lower carbon footprint, a lot less pollution from the rail line. Right? I think we got to wrap up, so I'm going to get out of the last word here.
Sure. Senator, I just want to thank you. Normally when we have a statewide leader who's not from Fairfield County, they don't understand the need to focus on rail and mass transit. I just wanted to applaud you for focusing on that. This is a huge problem that's going to cost billions of dollars to address in terms of upgrading our rail system to what it really could be, lowering train times and, you know, enabling transit-oriented development. But I just wanted to thank you for the millions of dollars. People probably don't realize in this room how lucky we are as a county to have gotten so many dollars from the federal government to really spur transit-oriented development in Norwalk and Bridgeport, to build a second train station, and to you know, a lot of transit infrastructure at Steel Point and in Stamford. So I just wanted to thank you for all the efforts you have. The state has certainly been focused on this as well. And Governor Malloy deserves credit for really taking this issue on, investment in transportation. It's a tough issue. It does potentially involve eminent domain, which is really controversial. And I just applaud you for taking this on, so thank you.
Well, Adam's been a long time champion of a second train station in Bridgeport. It's kind of ridiculous to think that Bridgeport, Connecticut only has one place to get on and off the train as one of our most important destinations, and another great opportunity for transit-oriented development. Okay, I know there's a lot of other people who want to talk here, but please just sort of, this has been an awesome conversation, and if you take anything from this, it should just whet your appetite to continue it. I'm the first member of the Senate from Connecticut to be on the Appropriations Committee in over 30 years, and I went on that committee I went on that committee in large part to get on the transportation subcommittee, which I'm on, to be part of this conversation and to really challenge people to think big and to stop accepting the status quo, which is really what this campaign is all about.